Come on, Bobby. It's time to get over it. She's back with you and she'll never cheat on you again. You've been together for 15 years, you have two wonderful children. You don't want to ruin all that. If you divorce, she will get your boys, and you will both live in poverty. If you get back together, it will be better for your whole family. This wasn't just a case of her getting drunk at a bachelorette party and having fun with an old boyfriend. This was something nuclear, and the punishment was going to be meted out. My problem was that if I was the one who pushed the red button, the nuclear blast would hit me far more than anyone else. No one had more to lose than me. And this bitch lecturing me wasn't helping my mood or my ability to make the perfect plan. That's where I found myself in the role of Bobby Smith, sitting on a pontoon boat on a lake with the three of us. This bitch, her chatty asshole husband, and my cheating wife. Being a Kansas native, I was never going to swim 300 yards to shore, an Olympic challenge for a flatlander. In 10 minutes, I was going to shut their mouths and give my whore wife an unforgettable reminder of her cheating. Now a little background on me, the poor bastard at the center of this shit storm. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, the self-proclaimed air capital of the world. This industrial city is home to Boeing, Cessna, Spirit, Beechcraft, and Embraer factories. My grades in school were average, but my parents didn't care. Mom was an alcoholic, chain-smoking, and rough-talking whore. Dad generally thought he was married when they got together. My older brother and sister, presumably with the same father as me, couldn't handle the fighting, bullying, and 911 calls from concerned neighbors. They left the same day they graduated from high school. They wished me luck and never looked back, afraid they would end up as witnesses in a murder trial. Teachers told me I was smart enough to get good grades, but I felt there was little sunshine in my future. At least I waited until the morning after graduation to leave home. My first and only stop was the U.S. Army Recruitment Center. Since I did well in the shop, I signed on as a wheeled vehicle mechanic. It was one of the first times in my life that it seemed like there was something positive in my future. To others, an Army private's paycheck was nothing, but I felt like a king. My platoon sergeant liked me because I didn't cause trouble, did my job well, and got along with the other guys. We drank and partied for 2 years. After my military service was over, I decided I wanted to go back to Wichita and work at one of the aircraft plants. I went to the National Aviation Training Center to get the special training and education needed to get one of the best jobs. My specialty was aerospace manufacturing and technology, and I decided that was where I would excel. Cessna was my first choice for a job, and I was happy when they hired me. 6 months later, I was helping a buddy build a workshop in his garage and had a life-changing accident. I was not happy about it at the time and berated my buddy for missing his part of the metal roofing. That mistake resulted in a large cut on my chest that bled like a stuck hog. At the first sight of the blood, I called medic and then laughed because I was no longer in the military. My buddy applied a store rag to my cut to stop the bleeding, and we headed off to get medical help. There was a doc in the box just a mile away, and he drove there in his pickup truck. I wasn't bleeding, but the floor was a mess, so they immediately put me in the treatment room. Not for my safety, but so they couldn't see the guy dripping blood all over the hall. What happened next changed my life forever. The most beautiful nurse that ever lived on Earth walked into my room. She was tall, well-built, with shoulder-length dark hair, and her smile lit up the entire room. Her name tag read Nurse Ann. After looking at my jeans, work boots, and bloody t-shirt, she turned her gorgeous blue eyes to me and said with a smile, "I didn't realize that auditions for the television version of Jackass were being held today." I don't know, since I've been busy single-handedly building an orphanage and treating cancer. My wound is the result of a metal sheet being torn off the roof by the cheers of Mensa Society members celebrating my discoveries. She half smiled, half smirked, and laughed at my comment. "It's only 10:30. How many beers have you had so far this morning?" "None so far, but that depends on how long it takes you to get me cleaned up." "After all, you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning," I answered her. Looking over my chart, she asked, "I take it you smoke cigarettes too?" "Yes." "You look a lot like my brother," she muttered. "Do you like your brother a smoker?" She took a deep breath and replied, "Yes, but there are days." I asked, "So there's hope that I can get you out since I'm so much like your favorite brother?" To which I replied, "Ha! Please take off your shirt. I have better things to do than spend time with a jerk like you." It was hard to pull the shirt over my bloody shoulder. She cut the shirt open, but not before shaking the scissors threateningly in front of me. Without saying anything, she began wiping the blood and dirt off my chest. I'm 6 feet tall, 190 pounds, mostly muscle. I guess that's what made her take longer to clean me than I expected. She chuckled as I reacted painfully to the disinfectant alcohol that was sprinkled liberally on my wound. I would have thought she would have carefully told me, "This is going to hurt a little." She stepped back to the door, turned to me, pointed to the examination table I was sitting on, and said sternly, "Stay." Only for a second did I see her smile. A few minutes later, Nurse Ann and the doctor returned to the room. I read the worry on her face that I would continue to act obnoxious and embarrass her. If I wanted to get anything out of her, I needed to be a better patient. When answering questions, I would say, "Yes, sir, no, sir, no, sir, yes, doctor." I was pleasant and obedient no matter what they said. As the doctor scrutinized my wound, she stood right behind him. I winked my eye at her. She smiled. The doctor had Anne prepare a syringe to dull the pain while he gathered needles to stitch me up. After Anne put the bandage on, the doctor told me, "No strenuous activity. Keep the wound clean and make an appointment in a week for Anne to remove the stitches." Great, I was looking forward to seeing her. He laughed. She blushed, but I was happy. Smirking, he said to me, "We need this room cleaned in 3 minutes. Can I count on you two to finish whatever you need to do in that time?" "Yes, sir," I said, but Anne didn't say anything back. She just smiled. "What time can I pick you up for dinner tonight?" I said with a smile. She thought for so long I thought it was going nowhere. Then she said, 7 o'clock tonight. She had a funny look on her face when she asked, "Red pickup?" "Yes." "Gee," she said and left the room. I headed home to get myself and my pickup cleaned up for the evening. I was wearing clean jeans, a fresh cotton shirt, and nice leather shoes. Anne would have been shocked and disappointed if I had worn anything better than that. Her outfit was identical to mine, only she looked much better in her skinny jeans. More men looked at her cotton shirt than mine. She knew how to work her legs so that a 1'7" woman could gracefully climb into a 3-4-ton pickup truck. After an initial period of awkward silence, the conversation continued throughout the evening. We both told stories of our lives. She was originally from a small town in southwest Kansas that I had never heard of. Her parents and brother farmed and ranched there. I rarely traveled outside of town, so I could only guess what was there. By the time we left the Mexican restaurant, it was getting dark. I asked her if she had seen the guardian of the plane statue on the rivers. She had no idea what I was talking about, so I took her to the confluence of the Big and Little Arkansas rivers. Where the two rivers meet in downtown Wichita, artist Black Bear Boson created a 44-foot-tall statue of the Keeper of the Plains. Native American lore tells of various tribes gathering at this location for powwows. In the 1870s and 80s, Chisholm trail drovers kept longhorns here before live cattle were loaded and shipped to Chicago for slaughter. I knew this while visiting the Wichita Cow Slaughterhouse, which recreated the Wichita of the 1870s. It was an impressive place at night with spectacular lighting and a bridge over the rivers symbolizing a bow and arrow. She had lived in Wichita for several years but had never been here. We stood on the riverbank and admired the view and all the families that had come here for the night's event. I kept my eyes on the clock, and when it struck 9:44, I moved next to her and gave her a hug. She accepted the offer with a smirk and a wiggle. At 9:45 p.m., 7 bonfires in the river exploded with a huge rumble and 30 feet of gas flames shooting up into the air. This caused Anne to rush into my arms. She was shaking with surprise and fear, until she felt me hold her tightly against my shoulder. She looked up at me and said, "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" "Yes." "You don't have to scare me into holding you. Just ask and I'll gladly hug you," she said with a smirk. After that, we had our first kiss. When the fire pot demonstration was over, we walked back to my pickup, holding hands. I walked her to the door of her apartment, made sure no one else was in it, and turned to leave. "Do you want to stay for a while?" she asked timidly. Timidly, she asked. Timidly, she asked. "I want to stay here for as many years as you'll let me. But I think after our first date, I'd best get home and start looking at my calendar. I need to schedule all the times we can be together over the next month." Anne stepped toward me and wrapped her arms around me. Snuggling as close to me as she could, she said, "This was a special night for me. Be here tomorrow at 6:30 for dinner. The next night I arrived at 6:30 p.m., carrying red roses for my new friend. She opened the door to show off a beautiful yellow dress the color of the sun. She had a funny look on her face when she said, "These flowers are very nice, but I'm just leaving for a date with someone else. I don't want to be late. Could you please put them in water? Oh, and lock the door when you leave. Goodbye." Then she popped out the front door. I watched the flowers wilt in my hand. What had happened here? I found a vase, put water and flowers in it, and went to the door. When I opened the door, Anne was standing there laughing at the look on my face. "You tricked me with the pots on the river last night. I caught you today. Are we even now?" "I guess so until next time," said I with embarrassment. She took my hand and said, "Come on in. I hope you like what I made for dinner." Before starting dinner, she offered me a choice of wine or beer. I chose beer. We laughed about last night and how much we enjoyed each other's company. We both knew where we would end up later that night. It was the room adjacent to the living room. A lamp was already glowing softly on the night table. It was hardly due to the fact that the cat was afraid of the dark. She was so nervous that she kept apologizing if I didn't like the food. Finally, I grabbed her hands and said, "Stop it. I like the food and the way you made it. Don't ever apologize unless I say I don't like it. But remember, if your hands touched it, I will like it. Okay?" That made her feel a lot more confident and excited about my presence. We had a wonderful dinner, laughed a lot, and discussed the important things in life. For the next 3 months, we were together every night and all weekend. It was time for me to meet her parents, and I felt a little awkward as I had no family in my life. I felt like I was in an orphanage, so it could be an interesting weekend with her family, who had lived on the same ranch for generations. The plan was to leave right after work on Friday afternoon and return to Wichita on Sunday night. Starting my pickup, I asked Anne for directions to her family's ranch. She replied, "Drive west from Wichita 2.5 hours to get to Wyatt Earp Boulevard in Dodge City. Drive west on Wyatt Earp Boulevard until you reach El Capitan. It's a bronze longhorn steer in the middle of the street. At El Capitan, turn south left onto City Guys. If you go past Boot Hill, then you've gone too far. Once you head south, keep going until you cross the Santa Fe Trail. There, turn west off the paved road and wake me up." You're messing with me again. What are these directions? Where's the address I can plug my GPS into? Why are you awake to direct me? She said, "Bobby, these are directions and landmarks on how to get to the ranch. You're going to make it. You wore me out last night. We need to get some rest. Wake me up when we're south of Dodge City." With those words, she pulled up her pillow and laid her head down, a smile on her face, of course. There were very few stoplights for the next 2.5 hours. I used every one of them to stretch and move around so my legs wouldn't get stiff. After 2.5 hours, I saw the lights of Dodge City. I drove past 2 huge slaughter plants and several large concrete grain elevators until I saw a street sign that read Wyatt Earp Boulevard. Damn, her directions had been correct so far. A few blocks later, there was a statue of a longhorn steer in the middle of the street. This is crazy. Now I need to find the Santa Fe Trail sign. It looked like she was still asleep, but I didn't believe it. She's too much of a perfectionist to let me wander the prairie trying to find a century-old cattle trail. I gently stroked her butt and she said, "Not again, honey. Wait an hour, please." "Come on already. Wake up before I end up in Oklahoma." "Okay, Bobby, where are we?" she said, as if she was really asleep. But I doubted she was. "Oh, okay, here's Miller's place. Only 3 miles to go." She started brushing her hair and fixing her makeup. We turned off the gravel road onto a sign that read Clear Creek Ranch, EST 1872. A ranch-style house showed up ahead, along with several buildings, paddocks, and barns. A couple in their 50s came out of the house to greet us. Anne fussed when she saw her friends in the yard. The pickup barely had time to stop before she jumped down and rushed over to her mother to hug her. By the time I got there, she had already hugged her father and kissed him on the cheek. "Mom, Dad, this is Bobby Smith. Bobby, this is Pat and Bill Green." I took off my cap and shook Bill's hand, and Pat gave me a big hug. We went into the house to get dinner. Anne went with Pat to finish things in the kitchen. I, on the other hand, was left with the unenviable task of talking to the woman's father. Of all the women I had been with, I had never been around them long enough to get to know their parents. It was a new experience for me. Bill said. It's a long drive to Wichita. Would you like something to drink? Tea, water, beer, whiskey, or bourbon? Cold water followed by a cold beer would suit me just fine, sir. No need to call me sir, Bobby. To everyone here, I'm Bill. When Bill returned, he said, Ann's brother Gary isn't here today. He had to attend a cattlemen's meeting in Dodge. You will meet him tomorrow. Gary is unmarried and lives in a mobile home on one of the other ranches. Since I had nothing to offer in terms of family, I started asking questions about pictures and items in the family room. Bill turned out to be a walking, talking book on the history of Clear Creek Ranch. It was laid out by the Pat Carter family. They were cattle ranchers, and they had one of the first brandings recorded in this county. Their branding was 2 C's, which were placed on the right thigh of an unlucky cow. The Cater and Green families had long resided in the area. There were pictures of old boys and girls hanging everywhere, and they were all related to Pat or Bill. Both Bill and Pat came from large families, so Ann had many cousins, nephews, and nieces. There were pictures of Wyatt Earp and his brothers, as well as Bet Masterson and Doc Holliday. These were real photos that the family had purchased at the time, not reproductions. Bill's grandfather was in several of these photos as a bystander. He had a receipt signed by Wyatt Earp for a pistol he bought from Earp after the marshal was convinced the bad guy wouldn't need it anymore. What interested me most was the collection of 1873 Winchester rifles in the gun box on the wall. This was the rifle that won the West. Their families used these rifles to shoot coyotes, rustlers, horse thieves, bandits, and Indian bands. It was more exciting than dinner, but Bill and I decided we would continue our journey into history later. If only we knew what was good for us. At dinner, I was able to listen to Pat Carter's family history, which coincided with Bill's family history. It was very interesting to hear this information about Ann's genealogy. It was getting late when Bill said he had to go to bed so he could get up early the next morning. This was the minefield I feared. Where would I sleep? Was I being too presumptuous, thinking I would be sleeping with unmarried Ann? Anticipating the talk, I said, I'll go get my bags. That way the Greenies would decide where I would sleep. The problem was that they had not yet decided my fate when I returned. They ignored Bobby's question. So I stepped forward and said, Bill, isn't that the bunkhouse down by the barn? When I was a kid, I wanted to be a cowboy and sleep in the bunkhouse. Would you let me fulfill a childhood fantasy by letting me spend the night there? Pat objected, Oh, you can't sleep in that old place. The bed has noisy old iron springs, and you won't get a good night's sleep. Maybe not, but I don't fulfill old fantasies so often. What time do you want me back in the house? Shaking her head, she replied, Breakfast starts at 8 a.m. I replied, See you then. Then picked up my bag and walked towards the lodge. Bill said, Let me show you the way. Bill and I commented on the beautiful sky studded with stars. Not much light pollution here. After we got inside the cabin, he showed me the quirks of the bathroom and said, Bobby, you don't have to stay here. You can stay with Ann if you want. Sir, I haven't earned the right to sleep with your daughter under your nose in your house. This room suits me just fine. I've stayed in much worse places while in the Army. This will suit me just fine. Bill smiled, shook my hand, and went back inside. Pat was right. The bed was awful, but I was tired and content with my life. There was no air conditioning in the room because here on the high plains, summer nights drop to 60 degrees, even though it's almost 100 degrees during the day. The windows and door were open to let in a fresh, cool breeze. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up to hearing a strange sound. I heard the spring on the screen door open with a groan, and then soft footsteps headed for the bed. Clothes were falling to the floor. I recognized the outline of a body approaching me. I spread the sheet so Ann could join me. Shit, I was going to surprise you. You surprised me. I'm surprised you waited this long to get out here. She laughed, making a sound that made my heart snap. Bobby, you made an impression on my mom and dad today. They really liked you a lot, especially Dad when you volunteered to sleep here. If you had demanded to sleep with me, he would have sent you here. And since you volunteered to sleep here, he doesn't mind you sleeping with me in the house. Since this is my first time meeting your parents, I'll stay in the cabin. I didn't just tell a story about my childhood dream of sleeping in the cabin. As a kid, I wanted to be a cowboy. It was an escape for me to imagine myself in the Old West instead of being with my horrible parents. The pictures of your family in Dodge City with Wyatt Earp and others were fascinating to me. When I saw the cabin, I knew I got to spend some time with a happy part of my childhood. What a wonderful sleep aid it was for me. My eyes stayed open until I saw her leave through the door. After the first blink, I fell asleep. That was until the sun woke me by popping out from behind the barn and peeking through the open window. The hot water heater in the bungalow wasn't on, so I started the morning with an invigorating cold shower. After changing into jeans and a t-shirt, I went outside and heard a noise coming from what I assumed was a metal car shed. I saw a young man trying to change a large inner tire of a large truck. Not to surprise him, I said, "Good morning. Hard work to start the day." "Good morning, that bastard is giving me a hard time." "Can I help you?" "I've done this kind of work before." He quickly replied, "Sure, climb up on the other side and we'll lift him up. Then I'll put the nuts on." Working together made this job short and we were done quickly. As we were crawling out from under the truck, the other guy said, "Thanks, I could have done it myself, but I'd be exhausted for the rest of the day." "My name is Gary." "Glad I could help." "I'm Bobby." "Bobby? I thought your name was Mr." "Wonderful, from all the comments I've heard from Anne." Gary smiled as he said this. I laughed at Gary's comments and then said, "I don't know why she says that after all. She's a lot smarter than me. If you don't believe me, just ask her." Gary laughed hard at that. He asked, "If you don't mind, can I ask you one more favor? I need to get this LN 8000 to the shop to repair the hydraulic elevator before harvest. Only on the condition that I get my ass back here in time for breakfast at 8 o'clock. Gary replied, "Fine, do you want to drive my pickup or your own to Dodge?" "Why don't I drive that big car?" "Give me the address and I'll head into town. I'm sure you have other things you'd rather be doing than driving to the store early in the morning." I jumped in the cab, started the 300 GP diesel engine, drove out of the machine shed, and headed for Dodge City. During this process, I watched Gary as he was no doubt unsure of my ability to drive this beast. The radio was already tuned to a local Western music station, so I was able to soak up some local flavor during the ride. Gary left the farm later than I did, but we arrived at the repair shop almost at the same time. On the way home, he said, "Thanks for helping me out this morning. Otherwise, I would have had to call in some hired help. You really know how to drive like our Big Red. Where did you learn that?" "I spent 2 years in the Army as a wheeled car mechanic. We had to have a license to drive all the vehicles we repaired." "How do you use this truck?" "From the last week of June through the first full week of July, we used this truck to haul wheat to those huge white concrete grain elevators you saw as you entered town. We have to hire locals to drive the grain truck so Dad and I can keep the combines running. Anne takes time off work to help Mom cook and deliver meals to all the workers spread out over 10 miles. He continued, "Since Anne's going to be working here anyway, would you like to get a job with us as a grain truck driver? The pay is lousy, the cab has no air conditioning, it's about 100 degrees, we work 16 hours a day, but the food and sense of accomplishment is great." "You say it's a great job. How can I resist?" And we both laughed. Gary wanted to know how airplanes were made, and I asked how to grow wheat. We got back to Clear Creek Ranch at 7:30 a.m., so I washed up in the bunkhouse and went to the main house. Everyone seemed to know that Gary and I had gone for a short walk. Bill asked, "I see you met Gary this morning. I'm surprised he let you ride into town in the Big Red. He takes great care of that truck. Only the most experienced driver can drive it during harvest time." "Yeah, he told me how it was used during wheat harvest." "Hey, Anne, I was offered a new job this morning." She looked at me. "And?" "Yeah, I'll be driving the Big Red during harvest. Should be a lot of fun. What do you think? Does it fit in with your plans?" She laughed and said, "So my brother told you that I would be here cooking and delivering food to the harvest workers? And you think you are so smart." After a short prayer, our breakfast was worthy of the amount of physical work these farmers do every day. In the middle of the meal, I noticed Pat and Bill glanced over at each other. Bill cleared his throat and asked Anne, "Are you having trouble sleeping these days? I thought I saw you sleepwalking last night?" I saw Pat start to giggle and Anne blushed. She kept shoving scrambled eggs into her mouth so she couldn't say anything. She looked at me looking for an intelligent comment, but I just shrugged and grinned. Anne set her fork aside and said, "I was worried about Bobby being put in a hired man's quarters. There might be spiders in there since no one else goes there." Besides, Bobby forgot to kiss me goodnight. When she finished speaking, everyone, including me, laughed. Anne did too. Anne and I spent the rest of the day in different places. She went with Pat and I went with Bill. Since I had expressed a desire to be a cowboy when I was young, Bill took me to Clear Creek Ranch. Clear Creek Ranch was owned by Pat's family on the Carter side. Bill and Pat then purchased parts of other ranches when they became free. There were 3,000 acres of native grass, grass that was indigenous to the Indians, and buffalo dominated the area. They had 250 black cows that were on pasture year-round. They bought another 1,000 head of steers each fall to fatten them up over the winter and early spring, and then send them to commercial feedlots. We rarely drove on the paved roads between ranches. If we came across another pickup, we were sure to stop and discuss the weather and the livestock market. It was obvious that Bill liked this kind of life and was very successful in his business. When we got back to the ranch, we saw Gary in the machine shed. I lit a cigarette and went over to talk to him. He looked at my cigarette and said, "You know she's going to make you quit, don't you?" "Yes, we've already discussed it." "We are in the negotiation stage now." He asked, "And how is that supposed to work?" My grandfather was in France during World War II and traded cigarettes for sex with French women. "I'm using that as a guideline. Do you think it will work?" He smiled and said, "You don't stand a chance, pal. You're doomed. Since you have a full pack and I'm banned for life from buying any tobacco products, I need to smoke a cigarette from you." I was really starting to enjoy my time with Gary. A barbecue was planned for the evening at a neighbor's ranch. There was a huge grill set up in the backyard, and when we pulled up, it resembled an Indian campground because of the people crowding around and the smoke of the fire. The rancher provided delicious steaks, and all the women brought their best side dishes, including Anne. Games were organized for the young children, and a concrete slab left over from an old building swept away by the tornado became the dance floor. 3 generations of the same family could be on the dance floor at one time. I danced slow numbers with Anne and went to the water tank filled with beer for the fast ones. Several young people kept her active during the fast songs, rocking her like a doll. When the songs changed from fast to slow, those would grab her and want to dance close and slow. Every time that happened, she would push them away and wave her index finger for me to come over and dance with her. It was a marvelous evening. We were all tired by the time we got back to Clear Creek Ranch. I kissed Anne goodnight and headed for the cabin. I could hear Pat and Bill giggling, teasing Anne for sleepwalking again. An hour later, I woke up to my cabin door slamming shut. I asked her, "Can you go back to your room or will you stay here with me?" "I'll stay with my man. As long as I can." Then she fell asleep in my arms. Early in the morning, Anne returned to the house without anyone noticing her. Breakfast was again at 8 a.m. and everyone around looked smug. No comment was made about how anyone had slept or if they had slept at all. On the breakfast menu were bacon and pancakes. I was served last, and everyone watched as a plate of pancakes was placed in front of me, along with a thick steak. Bill grinned and said, "I think you need this, son." Everyone but Gary laughed. But I'm sure he'll hear the story later. We attended Mass as a family. I was welcomed as a member of the family. From the way I was treated, I felt that this was the family I had always wanted to be a part of. An orphan who has found a family that loves and accepts him. Late that night, Anne and I headed back to Wichita with bags of food and wonderful thoughts of the weekend we had spent. The only thing we changed was that I moved into her apartment. Another step toward becoming a permanent family. 3 weeks later, we returned to Clear Creek Ranch. Once again, we were greeted with open arms and welcoming smiles. As I carried my travel bag into the cabin, I laughed a lot. The old iron bed had been replaced with a new double bed with a mattress. Pretty curtains hung on the windows and the water heater was plugged in. On a small table was a vase of sunflowers and a note. "Welcome home, son." The main purpose of this trip was the chaos of harvesting wheat. For 2 weeks, farmers had been harvesting the crops planted the previous fall. There was a need to get the grain harvested before a thunderstorm destroyed the crop with hail and wind. Gary and I spent time on the logistics of moving the Big Red to the right fields at the right time. We were ready for harvest, and thanks to everyone's efforts, there were no major mechanical breakdowns. Everything went well and all workers were safe, but eventually ran out of steam. At the end of July, we were able to return to Clear Creek. Friday evening, we spent with family. Saturday, I helped Bill and Gary clean and repair the equipment and machinery used to harvest wheat. After dinner, Anne told everyone that we were going on a night hike to see the Perseid meteor shower. Of course, I had no idea what we would be doing, but whatever it was, we would be doing it on horseback. Anne saddled her mare, and I was to get on Bill's mare. Anne saddled both horses, and we got on them and started walking down the driveway. After a mile, Anne stopped at the gate, got off her horse, opened the gate, and showed me to let both horses through. We followed the automobile trail through the grass. We stopped on a north-facing hillside and looked down at the pastoral view in the moonlight. There was no one around for miles. She opened the bedding behind the saddle, pulled out a fresh blanket, and spread it out for us to lie on. She turned to me and said, "This is a very special place on our ranch. This is where great-grandfather found the springs to water his cattle, which is how the family was able to survive." Water bubbled up from the springs in the rocks. My father drilled a pipe and the water flowed into that water tank over there. The Indians thought this place was special too. Even though great-grandfather owned the land, he never forbade the local Indians from coming here. 12 local cattlemen would take one fat steer to the small Indian camp once a year. They also hired some Indians to help round up the cattle in the fall and move them to winter pastures. She continued, "Tonight we will be watching the Perseid meteor shower, which occurs every July and August. As we lay here, we will be able to see 30 to 90 shooting stars. This is the perfect place because there is no light pollution. I have been coming here for this spectacle at least once a year since I was born. My mom and dad also come here on horseback and talk about all the family members who have been here in the last 130 years. She said, "I told the family we were coming here so we could have a chance to be here alone. You're the first man I've ever brought here. Thank you for the honor. This is a really special place. I didn't plan it, but it's so much better than I could have imagined." We turned to face each other, sitting cross-legged, and taking her hands in mine, I said, "Anne Green, will you make me the happiest man in the world by marrying me?" She lunged at me like a snake attacking a dog on the prairie. Fast and deadly. "I'll marry you. Bobby Smith. Whenever, but definitely forever, I will be your wife." As we lay cuddled together and looked up at the sky, contemplating what our lives would be like, she jumped up and shouted, "Look!" I saw 1,000 stars, but not what she wanted me to see, so I stood behind her as she pointed to 2 unusually bright stars side by side. Below those stars was a U-shaped cloud. It was a giant-sized emoji smiley face. Anne took it as the universe's approval of our engagement. After a few minutes, the clouds drifted farther away, but we stayed behind to enjoy the beautiful sight. "Anne, would you excuse me for a moment, please?" She cast a curious glance at me. I stood up, walked over to my horse, opened my saddlebag, and pulled out a small box. I opened the box and the diamonds sparkled in the light of every shooting star. Needless to say, she was thrilled with the ring. Smiling, she said, "You'll have to ask my father if you can marry me." "I already did that today." "Didn't you see the way he glowed during dinner?" Laughing, she exclaimed, "I thought it was because Mommy put her hand on his leg." We laid down on the blanket to enjoy the experience and the view. After a while, she got up and said, "Shall we go freshen up?" She started to walk away and I followed her. In the middle of the pasture was a cistern with cool, clear water. She threw her leg over it and said, "Come in, the water is good." The water was clear and the fresh water bubbling up from the ground was cold. Splashing the water with my fiancé was invigorating and refreshing. It didn't take long to determine that we were clean enough to put our clothes on. We held hands as we rode back to the barns. After the harness and horses were put away, she decided to spend the night with me in the cabin. Before breakfast, she extended her ring finger to anyone who looked that way. Mother shed tears of joy. Gary was happy for both of us. With the engagement began a months-long process of planning and thinking out the smallest details for a successful wedding. I felt sorry for Pat as my mom was not present for the planning and execution of the wedding. The wedding was held at the neighboring Greens Church. It wasn't a very large building, but there were many friends, neighbors, and relatives expected to be invited. I didn't bother to ask Bill how many steers he had to slaughter for the wedding dinner. Gary was my best man and 3 buddies from work were my groomsmen. With Anne at the altar were 4 of her cousins. Bill had instructed that the guests be seated on either side of the aisle so as not to draw attention to my lack of relatives. The wedding went off without a hitch and everyone had a great time. My work buddies enjoyed dancing with Anne and Gary's attractive cousins. 2 days later, we boarded the Amtrak Southwest Chief train in Dodge City and left at 5 to 6 a.m. for Santa Fe, New Mexico. The week we spent there was wonderful, both in and out of the hotel room. From there, we started living like any young married couple would. That was until that fateful Saturday afternoon a few years later when I received a call from the city police. Anne had been in a serious car accident and was in intensive care at the hospital. I called Bill as I was driving like crazy to the hospital. It wasn't fair of me, but I had no one else to talk to about it. The doctor told me she was in critical condition, with severe damage to her heart and major organs. There was no brain damage yet. He said I could visit her briefly, just enough to let her know I was there for her and wanted her to live. She opened her eyes when I called her name. I told her that I was there for her and that her parents were on their way to see her. She grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go until the nurse made me leave. Pat and Bill arrived in record time, 2 hours later. I got them into the room right away, even though it meant I would have to get out. All we had to do was wait and pray. The three of us rotated through the night so that someone would be by her side at all times. The next morning we met with the doctor and he gave us the bad news. Her kidneys were shutting down and that caused most of her other organs to stop working as well. He apologized that there was nothing they could do but keep her comfortable. I asked, "Does she know about this?" The doctor sighed and replied, "She's a very good nurse. She kept me in suspense the whole time. She knew what her injuries would lead to." Pat gasped. Bill turned his face away and tears soaked my shirt. The doctor said, "She will most likely pass away today, so I've authorized all three of you to visit her at the same time." Bill went outside to call Gary and ask him to come right over. Pat and I hugged until it was time for me to wipe my tears and go to her room. I walked into her room and was greeted by a faint voice. "Hi, cowboy." "I'm glad you're here. There's no place I'd rather be than next to you." At that moment, Bill came into the room, said, "Hello, princess," and kissed her on the forehead. Anne said, "I'm glad you're all here because I only have the strength to say this once. I am so glad to have lived this life with the three of you. You are all so special to me and I love you all. Listen to me. This is very important. I don't want you to fall into despair and depression when I leave you. Please only think of me in the moments we had fun, not that you miss me. I know you will keep me in your hearts, but don't ruin the future by mourning the past. Bobby, you are my one true love. I want you to love again, get married, and have the children you talked about. Please do that for me. Remember, I will always be a part of you. I will always be by your side. I will be your guardian angel until you join me. Mom, Dad, thank you for everything you have done for me. I love and cherish you. Please do me one last favor. Please take care of Bobby. You are the only family he has right now, and I don't know how my boy will get along without me. I'm really tired. Let me take a nap for a few minutes, and then we can talk again." She squeezed my hand to let me know she was still with us. Her sleep was not restful. She was moaning and mumbling something now and then. About mid-morning, she squeezed my hand hard and then let go. The muscles in her face sagged, and there was no life in her hand. She was no longer there. We asked the doctor to disconnect her from the monitors so we wouldn't worry about her death, and he agreed. The three of us stood and hugged without saying anything. I stepped away from her to let the nurse know it was over. We divided her ashes into 3 parts. One was buried in their church, one was scattered around the Clear Creek Ranch headquarters, and one jar was combined with mine and scattered at her special place on the hillside. It was a solemn occasion, and the church was full of people. I still stayed in the bunkhouse while we settled all the details. I took an extra 2 weeks of maternity leave from Cessna and spent it at the ranch. I went back to work to reorganize my mind and focus. I traveled to Clear Creek every weekend to help Gary with any projects that required extra labor. This was very good for my mood, as I could almost feel her standing on the porch watching us. Most evenings, I would go to a special place to sit and commune with the spirits that were listening to me. I became more and more involved in the Green family's social activities. Easter Sunday was celebrated in a special place as it was the perfect place to watch the sunrise. I participated in Mother's Day and Father's Day celebrations with Pat, Bill, and Gary. There were several neighborhood barbecues that were fond memories. Gary asked me to join him and his friends for the first day of pheasant hunting in November. Gradually, I moved on, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. Anne wanted me to move on too. Christmas and Thanksgiving were hard on all of us, but by the end of the holidays, we were back to normal. Gary would come to Wichita every few months and we would go to parties. A year and a half after we said goodbye to Anne, Gary and I were at a bar and dancing a Western in Wichita. Two young ladies, stylishly dressed in short Western-style skirts and cowboy boots, walked past us and smiled. We set aside our glasses of stale beer and asked them to dance. Thanks to Anne's tentative prodding, I was now able to avoid embarrassing myself on the dance floor. Gary and I spent the next hour with Shelley and Kathy. Me with Kathy and Gary with Shelley. Kathy excused herself to go to the bathroom and Gary went to get a drink. Shelley put her arm around me and said, "Dance with me, please." Sure. And we went on stage to a slow song. Shelley said, "I don't like Gary and Kathy says she doesn't mind being with him. I know we just met, but can I spend more time with you? How can I say no thank you to a handsome blonde like you? Don't tell Kathy, but I preferred you anyway." It was Gary's turn to be the first to get the pretty girl in the couple, and that's how it worked out. Kathy laughed. "I lost to the guy with the biggest cue, didn't I?" "Yeah, but I'm better looking and a better dancer." We spent the next few hours talking, drinking, and dancing. I got her phone number and asked if we could have dinner Sunday night, and she agreed. Gary had a good time with Kathy, and they might get together the next time he was in Wichita. It was obvious that Kathy would not be traveling to Dodge City to see him. Shelley and I had a lot of fun that Sunday. It was a little frustrating when she asked how I knew Gary. I replied that he was my brother-in-law until my wife was killed in a car accident. He's a good buddy and I go pheasant hunting with him every fall. She was sympathetic to my situation and we never talked about it again. We went on our usual relationship path. We had a date in the middle of the week just to do something together. We had a regular date on Saturday night, dinner, a movie, and some dancing. Then we added a Sunday afternoon to drive around the neighborhood, talk, eat ice cream or something so simple but healthy. We enjoyed every second we spent with each other. It wasn't long before she moved in with me. She was now my love and my world. She didn't mind my week-long trips to Clear Creek to help harvest wheat and hunt pheasants. It even helped our relationship as we both realized how much we missed each other. We had so much in common that we quickly became a couple. She wanted to have at least 2 kids, just like me. She wanted to have a nice house after marriage, as did I. Shelley worked in the accounting department of one of the hospitals. She had some education after high school, but not much. Everything was perfect in our world until one day I came home from work and she was sitting on the couch crying. "Please forgive me, Bobby. It was a mistake and I can't take it back. I'm so sorry, please forgive me." I didn't like her words. What did they mean? I was afraid I was going to lose another lover. I said, "I'll forgive you. Now tell me what horrible thing you did so I can kiss you and tell you it's okay." "No, you'll kick me out of the house." "Please, I love you. Please stay with me." It took about 10 more minutes of sobbing over this inappropriate event before I just said, "That's enough. Tell me now, or I'm leaving for the bar." Drunks have a better understanding of what they're talking about than you do. "So tell me now." "I'm pregnant, Bobby. I'm sorry we talked about waiting until we were married, buying a house and getting settled. I messed up, please forgive me." I was surprised because she was on the pill. Oh well, apparently that didn't work. My hands went around her face and I pulled her to me and said, "I have 2 questions for you. Think before you answer. I'm not going to let you come back later and change your story. Are you ready?" "Yes," she sobbed. "Good, pay attention. Shelley, I love you so much. Will you marry me?" It took her a moment to realize what I had asked. Then she asked, "You're not mad at me for getting pregnant? Do you want to marry me?" "Oh, Bobby, I would love to marry you." Yeah. Thank you so much for not being angry with me for getting pregnant. I am very happy to ask you to marry me. I want to live with you and love you forever. Now my next question." She stopped sobbing but continued to make funny wheezing noises. "Can we name our baby Carter?" I just love that name, whether it's a boy or a girl. She put her arms around my neck and said, "I love that name too. We are going to have such a wonderful life with our baby boy." The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of events surrounding the wedding and the birth of the baby. Everything she planned for both events was appropriate and affordable. There were no diva outbursts in our apartment. The only problem was her asshole sister who always insisted that everything be done the way she wanted it done if she was in the same place. She told Shelley that I should spend 3 times my full monthly salary on her ring. I told Shelley that it was fine if we could move into her sister's house for 3 months and not have to pay rent, food, and car payments. Her sister Beth, a bitch, didn't think that was an acceptable solution. It didn't help that her husband Hal kept harassing me about how cheap I was and how great he was for paying 4 months' salary for Beth's ring. I know how he paid for the ring. He racked up a bunch of credit card purchases, including the ring, then filed for bankruptcy and walked away laughing about how smart he was. The only disappointment in the wedding was on her parents' part. They wanted a lavish celebration to impress their friends, but were very insistent that they not pay a dime for the event. So, Shelley and I had the wedding we wanted for ourselves. Not for anyone else. My best man was once again Gary Green. Pat and Bill were invited and enjoyed attending the event. I was very happy to see them. Our Carter was born on the 3rd of March and was a healthy, happy boy. Shelley was the perfect mom, knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. I just did what I was told, except I didn't need to be told how to hold, love, and care for him. In June, we brought Carter to Clear Creek Ranch in time for the beginning of the wheat harvest. I had made arrangements with Bill and Pat before we arrived. During the phone call, Pat had an emotional moment when I proudly said that our son was named Carter. Shelley had only met Bill and Pat for a brief moment at our wedding, so this was her first real visit to them and the ranch. The plan was for Shelley to return to Wichita the next day, and I stayed behind to help with the harvest. As we pulled up to the ranch, Pat almost ran over Bill and Sir Henry's dog to get to Carter. She hugged Shelley first and then carried Carter into the house. Although Shelley was a wonderful mother, she was ready for another woman to help with her son. Neither sister nor mother wanted to do anything but coo to the baby and then ask Shelley, "Do you have anything to eat or drink?" Pat did a good job of not overstepping the maternal boundaries that women set when caring for children. Pat fed Carter and rocked him, waiting for him to fall asleep. Taking this opportunity, Shelley asked me, "Can we go for a walk?" "Sure," I replied, wondering if something was wrong. Shelley took my hand and said, "I just want to go for a walk with you. You and me, just by ourselves. I love my son, but I like spending time with his daddy." She continued, "Pat is just fascinated by Carter. You'd think he was her own grandson. In fact, it's her only grandson if you count that I'm still her son-in-law. I consider her as close a mother as I've ever had. She and Bill treat me like a son, and I love them like parents. Their daughter is no longer in my life, but I am in their lives and they are in mine. Of course, our relationship is my first priority. I hope you are not concerned about my relationship with them." A couple steps later, she said, "I think you keep things in balance." We walked for about an hour, and then Mom's alarm clock went off and we went back into the house. All was quiet as Carter was asleep and Pat was working in the kitchen. Bill and I went to meet Gary and discuss what fields we would start combining the next morning. Bill and Pat took turns holding and feeding Carter until he fell asleep for the night. Shelley couldn't believe how dark the night was until she looked up and saw 1,000 stars as we carried Carter into the bunker. We were surprised to see a brand new baby bed in the room. It had a blue blanket on it with boots, saddle, and horses for our little cowboy. It was a message that Carter could come visit them anytime. Shelley came back to our house after lunch. She had planned to leave after breakfast, but she and Pat started chatting and the time flew by. I stayed at the ranch for a week and then Gary drove me back to Wichita when I went to the John Deere dealer for parts. 2 years passed and Shelley gave birth to our second son, Tyler. Pat came and stayed with us for a few days to happily take care of Carter while Shelley was with Tyler. As the boys got older, we started spending more time at the ranch. They were old enough to ride horses and understand the old cowboy stories Grandpa Bill told. The 6 of us went to Boot Hill where they rode in a horse-drawn wagon, watched a gunfight on Front Street, and drank sarsaparilla at the Long Branch Saloon. We took the boys to a pasture west of Dodge City so they could see that the wagon ruts on the Santa Fe Trail still spooked the land. They loved living surrounded by cowboy history. Every summer, we let the boys stay for a week or two. They made friends with the neighborhood kids and rode their horses to visit each other. Pat and Bill took them to Sunday school, and that increased their circle of friends. The more they stayed on the ranch, the more they wanted to go back there. When they were 10 and 12 years old, they wanted to spend all summer at the ranch. We compromised and let them spend the month of July there after the harvest. By then, Shelley was tired of life on the ranch. It was fun at first, but it was hard work and not as much fun. The whole month the boys were at the ranch, she wanted to dance and have fun every night. She was approaching the magical 40 mark and wanted to imagine turning back time. She went back to work and had a group of young women with whom she socialized. That fall, I took Carter with me on my annual pheasant hunt for the first time. He had never seen a ring-necked pheasant and was looking forward to joining his friends. There were 10 people in our hunting group. 8 men walked the field to get the birds up, and 2 at the far end blocked the field for the birds to take off in front of the shooters. The boys walked beside and behind their fathers. After lunch, the boys were taught how to clean and dress the birds. Each boy made a headdress of long, colorful tail feathers to wear in the evening. That evening, we ate about a third of the birds and the rest were frozen and taken home. Carter brought home some beautiful feathers for his mom to put in an arrangement. Shelley was not impressed and the feathers disappeared, much to Carter's disappointment. The next summer, the boys decided to spend the entire summer at the ranch. They told Shelley and me that we could come anytime we wanted. Shelley didn't like this plan. She wanted the boys to stay in Wichita, but she didn't feel the need to spend much time with them. She worked during the day and went out with friends a few times a week. She would be out the door at 7:30 in the morning and might not get home by the time they went to bed. So you can understand their frustration with the situation. Shelley and I had some disagreements about her not being home. I had no reason not to trust her when she was out with her friends, but I didn't feel she should spend all that time with those particular friends. Pat called me when Bill was driving her and Gary to Wichita. I realized she was upset, and then she told me that Gary was very sick. All his life he had been plagued by kidney stones. His constant smoking was exacerbating the problem. It got to the point where he developed end-stage renal disease and needed a kidney transplant. I learned that he had been on the list for some time to receive a new kidney, but none of them were a good fit. I knew he had this problem, but he didn't give the appearance that it was life-threatening. They wanted to meet with me when they got into town. I went to their doctor's office and asked to see if I could be a donor for Gary Green. The next few days were very stressful for the family. The boys were very concerned about Gary's uncle. Finally, as Gary's condition worsened, they decided that I was the perfect match for him. The transfer was scheduled for the next morning. I visited Gary that evening, and he was overwhelmed with the opportunity to receive the transplant and get on with his life. He thanked me profusely, and I told him that it proved that we were siblings, even though we had different parents. Early the next morning, we were taken to our neighboring operating rooms. I told him, "I'll see you on the other side," as we were separated. Unbeknownst to me, when Gary was brought into the operating room, his heart had stopped and the doctors were unable to restart it. My surgeon had already made the first incision to remove my kidney when he was informed that the surgery was canceled. When I woke up, Pat and Bill were in my room and I asked, "Is Gary's surgery complete?" Pat started crying and Bill stood up, took my hand and said, "Gary died of a heart attack on the operating table. The doctor said there was nothing they could do because his kidneys had stopped functioning. The water entering his lungs and heart was the final blow." We all cried until a nurse came in to give me sleeping pills. On a bright sunny day, the entire ranch for miles attended Gary's funeral. Shelley, the boys, and I sat with the family in the front pew. Shelley took the boys home and I stayed at the ranch recovering from an aborted surgery. Gary was getting ready to take over the ranch, so Bill had to do more work. I was going to spend most weekends at the ranch to help him. Shelley didn't like this decision, as she wanted to maintain her social life with her friends rather than take care of 2 active boys. We disagreed but did not get into critical arguments. One afternoon she came home from work and was as happy as a schoolgirl. She had been appointed to represent her department on the employees committee at work. No extra pay, but prestige and a chance to do something else. The hospital had a connection with a famous soccer player who was to come to the hospital to lead a fundraiser to build a new pediatric wing. Since Lance Belton regularly traveled to Wichita to service his Cessna Citation airplane, his agent agreed to have Lance speak and encourage donors to donate to the hospital. Belton was a receiver for the Oakland Raiders and had a reputation for being a dirty player. Of course, every Kansas City Chiefs fan in town thought so too. At the luncheon, Shelley happened to sit at the head table with Belton. She was also in the group that took him from room to room in the hospital to visit his children. Since his citation was on the Cessna runway, I went to where his plane was departing for Los Angeles. I saw Shelley and her friends canoodling with Lance and he was enjoying it, kissing and hugging all of her friends. I tried to get closer but wasn't allowed as the jet engines were ready to start and people were being pulled back. Lance hugged Shelley and gave her a "thanks for showing me around" kiss. He took her hand and started pulling her toward the airplane. She resisted, but her girlfriends pushed her forward all the way to the airplane ramp. The door closed and the engines roared to life. There was no way I could get to the plane, so I called her on my cell phone. She answered and said, "Hi, honey, guess who's flying to Los Angeles for dinner tonight? The plane has to be in St. Louis tomorrow, so I'll be dropped off on the way back to my next stop. I'll see you tomorrow," and then hung up. I ran up to her friends and asked what was going on. They laughed and said, "Shelley is going to have the best night of her life, flying on a private jet and joining the Mile High Club." Having worked in the airplane business, I knew what it was like to be entertained at altitudes above 1 mile. It was a shock to me. Why would she want to do that? The girl saw my desperation and teased me about being cuckolded by an NFL star on his private jet. One girl said, "Tomorrow she'll go back to you and your boring farm life, but this is a night she'll never forget." That's right, she'll never forget the divorce that will ruin her life. That got their attention, and one of them said, "This is a big deal for her. Don't spoil that pleasure." Very few women get the chance to spend the night with a professional soccer player in his private jet. She deserves to have some fun. Just get over it. I hope she has fun, because it's going to be hell for her when she gets back to my house. I then left as I didn't need to hear anything more from these sluts about what my slut wife was doing. I stopped at Home Depot and bought a dozen different sized boxes to load her shit into. I took an Uber to take her to the airport and took her car home to load the boxes into it. She would have to drive herself home. Later, I got a text from Shelley. It was a picture of Shelley kneeling in the aisle of the airplane. The caption was, "Hi, Bobby, having a great time. Wish you were here." I received another text with the photo. The text was like this: "I am now an official member of the Mile High Club. Invite me to dinner tomorrow night to celebrate, okay? Someplace really nice." The next morning, I called my boss and asked if I could take a few hours off to take care of important business. He allowed it, and I called the guy who advertised divorce attorneys the most on TV to make an appointment. The guy I met with wasn't a big boss, but he was a young man who seemed smart and had a good understanding of what happens when a wife cheats and the husband wants a divorce. He said, "It's a simple math equation. She gets 90% of the assets, and you get 10% of what the two of you had. In addition, since you have 2 sons, you will be paying her 35% of your paycheck for child support. I have looked at your tax returns and pay schedule, and you are both just making ends meet right now. In the event of a divorce, you'll be paying the same bills so that she lives in your house, and you get what's left over, which isn't much." He continued, "Bobby, you'll need a second job to pay your rent and have some cheap food. Since she will only get a portion of your paycheck, extra things for your boys will be hard to get. Things like sports uniforms, camps, and bikes will be unnecessary, and you both won't be able to buy them. She can live in the house with your boys. You'll be paying the mortgage." I lamented, "So I'm totally screwed. Is there anything I can do?" He said, "Put your ego on the shelf and wait until the boys are at least 14 years old. Then they can choose who they want to live with. From what you've told me, they'd rather live with you. Then divorce her. It will still be expensive, but you won't have to pay child support. Your salaries aren't that far apart, so alimony won't be crippling. Here's a battle plan for you. Don't yell, scream, or threaten her. That will only strengthen her position in court. Buy a small tape recorder and record every meaningful conversation you can. You can kick her out of the house for a few days, but she has rights to the house. She can return to it by court order, so don't lock her out. Do not engage with her until she has undergone a full and humiliating battery of STD tests." Continuing, he said, "Using history as an example, if she cheated now, she will definitely cheat again. We will use that to our advantage. You cannot use cheating as a reason for divorce. However, if she wants to get back with you, demand a prenuptial agreement stating that anyone who cheats, including you, will get nothing in the divorce and will have custody of the boys. Now you have 2 ways out of this mess. Neither of them will be quick or easy. I'll work with you on any specific clauses you want to include in the agreement, if that's the route you take. You have to walk a fine line to make it sound like you don't want her back, but at the same time, we'll let her come back with a postnuptial agreement. So be careful. If she gets a good lawyer because you pissed her off, you could be in a difficult position for a few years, so be careful. If she decides she doesn't want to go back to you, you'll be giving me and her most of your paycheck for years." My first thought was, thank you for doing nothing. Now my main goal in life was to protect my boys from becoming victims of the divorce war. I had to do everything I could to get custody of them. Their mother was a whore, and I had to get them away from that selfish bitch. If I had to play the role of the smug, cuckolded husband, I would do it for the short term. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was the only thing I could do to rid them of her. As I cooled down, I realized I would take his advice, but only after I told her how much she had hurt me. I loved her and she did this to me. Last night I was tempted to destroy everything of value that belonged to her. It's a good thing I didn't. I swore she would be destroyed, but I had to hold my horses. In basic training in the army, we were taught that the greatest test of patience is to wait until the enemy is unknowingly in ambush range before opening fire. I needed to make 2 ambush plans, as Lance's wife Lance would be ambushed as well. I got home from work a little before she arrived. As soon as she walked in the door, she got angry and asked, "Why did you run my car home instead of coming to meet me? Didn't you get my messages? It was very difficult for me to get home and I don't appreciate it." I turned off my phone so I wouldn't get nasty messages. "Come sit with me and tell me about your trip." I moved to a padded chair so she couldn't sit next to me. She said cheerfully, "It was a great trip. The takeoff was fast and hot. We gained altitude very quickly. The pilot was flying south of Denver, so I was able to see both the sunset over the Rocky Mountains and the lights of Denver. It was breathtaking to watch the land go by. I had a great time. You're going to like Lance. He's a great guy. I was talking to your club girlfriends and they told me you were going to become a member of the Mile High Club during this flight. Did you become a member?" Her face froze for a second as she thought of what to say. She asked, "What is the Mile High Club?" "You know, it's a club one joins after doing it in an airplane at an altitude of more than 1 mile. "So you're a member of that club now?" Stammering, she replied, "Oh God, no!" Lance was a real gentleman. He knew I was married to a fine man and wouldn't cheat on him. "Why did your friends tell me you were going to join the Mile High Club and you said you didn't know what it was?" Gathering her thoughts, she replied, "I don't know why they said that. Nothing like that ever happened." "So you didn't have sex with Lance?" She replied sternly, "No, I did not, and I resent that question. Do you think I'm lying to you?" "Did you kiss him?" She quickly replied, "Yes, just kissed him on the cheek." "Then let me get this straight. The only time you kissed him was a peck on the cheek. You didn't know about the Mile High Club. You didn't plan to have fun with an NFL star on his private jet when you flew to Los Angeles. You did not have sex with him or anyone else during any of the airplane rides. Is that correct?" She sat up straight and said, "It's true. I'm not lying to you. I love you and I resent you doubting me." "I'm sorry, darling. Instead of doubting your honesty, let's look at the pictures sent to me from your cell phone." A concerned expression appeared on her face, and she tried to get up to go into hiding when I said, "Here, dear, is a picture of you and Gentleman Lance. Or isn't that you in the picture?" With the blood draining from her face, she said, "Oh my God. Where did you get that?" "Oh, Bobby, I'm so sorry. It's just awful." She fell to the floor in a puddle, sobbing and sobbing. I sat still as a rock, letting her realize the implications. Between sobs, she said, "You weren't supposed to get those pictures. They are only meant for me, as a reminder of an unforgettable evening. He must have used my phone to send them to you. I didn't text you those awful things." "That's even worse, isn't it, Shell? You're a cuckold and you keep the memorabilia. You treat me like just another dumb husband who adores his wife, even though she was having fun with some guy she just met. What a sad situation for both of us. Don't you love me anymore? Am I such a bad lover that you are doing this to our marriage?" Now, unable to hold back her sobs, she spits out, "No, no! It wasn't like that at all. It was my exciting adventure. It wasn't about cuckolding you or humiliating you. I was just doing something exciting, and it had nothing to do with our marriage." "Well, then your marriage will be disconnected as a result of your great adventure. When the airplane door slammed shut, it closed our marriage and our family." She cried, "Our marriage should not suffer. I know I made a mistake and I will never do it again. We can get through this. We just have to love each other enough to save it." Standing up, I said, "I don't know how we're going to do this. Your clothes are already in the car. You and I can't be together right now. You need to go somewhere for a few days until we figure out what's next. Honestly, I can't stand the sight of you right now. Please go away." "But this is my home too," she sobbed. "Yes, it's your home too. But if you want to save your marriage, You'd better leave for a few days. If you don't, with the mood I'm in, I'm going straight to a lawyer to get a divorce. I'm giving myself a chance to cool off. If you want a divorce, then let's get dueling lawyers lined up against each other for a bloodbath. Bobby, I have nowhere to go. I don't want a divorce. I want to stay with you. I'll never do anything like that again. You have your slutty girlfriends who talked you into getting on the airplane. You can tell them about the one night you spent, and upon your return, you face the hell of a lifetime. They'll be interested to hear the story. She shook her head and said, Okay, I will. But please remember, I love you, Bobby. Funny way to show your love for someone. All that comes out of your mouth is your lies. She blew her nose, wiped her eyes, and asked, Can I call you tomorrow? Sure, I said, but I didn't agree to answer that phone number if I didn't want to. The next week, that afternoon conversation happened again. She said she loved me and wanted to get back together. I said I was having a hard time just accepting her nasty crap back into my home. That evening, I proceeded with my plan to balance the scales. It took 3 evenings to complete the project. I texted Shelley and suggested we go out to dinner and talk about everything but our marital problems. She gladly accepted my invitation. Every word we spoke was checked by the person we were talking to, see if it was a veiled threat or an excuse. She wanted to go back to our house, but that wasn't going to happen. We parked outside her friend's apartment and I said we had something to discuss. She searched my face for good or bad news. Shelley, whatever happens to our marriage, you need to get tested for STDs. For the sake of your health and taking care of the boys. She replied, That won't be necessary since both boys have been good, clean men. I'm not going to trust our son's health to your opinion of good, clean guys. If you don't pass the test, I'll get a restraining order to keep you away from them. She took it as concern for our boys, not humiliation. Although that was exactly what I had planned. Since you told me nothing but lies about your airplane ride, I want to see the results of those tests. You're going to have to work hard to get me to trust you again. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. If circumstances had been different, I would have done the same thing. 2 days later, she called and wanted to come home for a few minutes. I agreed and opened the door when she knocked. With all the shame she was feeling, she handed me the tests. The tests came back positive for syphilis and chlamydia. I was thrilled, but I couldn't show it. This made me very much better at getting a prenup. All I could say was, Oh, Shelley, but I said it very sadly. She tried to hug me, but I pushed her away and said, Not until you're clean. Blood-filled eyes looked at my face. She nodded and tearfully walked out the front door. The next time I saw her, she came inside to show me her clean STD test. It was very hard for her that this had happened, and she was no longer so insistent on asking me to get back together. She suggested I go to the lake with some friends for a change of scenery and topics of conversation. I agreed as I was ready to take a shit on her. That's how we got to where this story started. I turned to Shelley's nasty sister and said, Shut up! The more you open your filthy mouth, the less I want anything to do with anyone in your family. Shelley, tell her to shut up or you and I won't be talking until Christmas. At this, Shelley walked over to her sister and said, Shut up about it. You're only making it worse. When the noise on the boat subsided, I got up and said, I'm going for a swim to cool off. With those words, I pulled off my shirt and heard Shelley gasp. Oh my God, she exclaimed. On the left side of my chest was a large tattoo in the shape of a bright red heart. At the top of the heart it said, My one true love. Shelley thought I did it to prove my love for her. Instead, inside the heart were 3 letters, Anne. I stood there watching her vomit overboard. She stood up, walked over to me and touched my heart. How could you do this to me? I could ask the same thing of you, Shelley. How could you do this to me? She stammered, How could I look at it when you're making love to me? The same way I can look at you with a tattoo in your head, you cheating on me right on board an airplane. What's the worst of it? Now you can feel my pain? Now I can be the one who says, just get over it. That was the end of what was supposed to be a neutral meeting. Shelley and I began marriage counseling, and it was all the same conversations we'd been having for weeks. No resolution to the main problem between us. She now has a clean bill of health and wants to move back into the house. I told her I agree, but we need to get a prenup so we are clear on what we expect from each other. I met with a lawyer and laid out my demands to him. My wording was, In exchange for Bobby not filing for divorce because of Shelley's infidelity with Lance Belton and others, Shelley agrees to the following. First, never talk about Lance Belton or any contact she had with him and others on his airplane. This includes trying to humiliate Bobby with unfavorable comparisons to Belton. Second, Shelley will not engage in any written, verbal, or electronic correspondence with Belton. Third, Bobby agrees to never call Shelley derogatory comments. Fourth, both parties will make an honest attempt to repair their relationship after Shelley's infidelity. Fifth, Shelley will be tested for HIV/AIDS at 3-month intervals for 9 months. Sixth, both parties agree that if either party comments on the cheating, she will relinquish all rights to ownership of the home, joint accounts, custody of the children, and child support. Seventh, Shelley agrees to always tell the truth and never lie to Bobby. My attorney told me that this is a very demeaning postnuptial agreement, and if Shelley has adequate legal representation, it will be rejected. I told him that in my opinion she was willing to agree to everything I listed. He polished up the agreement to get another $1,000. I presented it to Shelley and she readily signed it. I could have included a clause in the contract that she would not socialize with her promiscuous friends. I didn't because I wanted to give her a chance to cheat on me again, and then I would cut her out of my life. She wouldn't have the opportunity to turn my sons against me. She was glad I helped her move her things into the house. There are only 3 bedrooms in our house, and the boys each have a bedroom. A dilemma arose as to how we should sleep. We wanted to present ourselves in a good light to the boys, but I didn't want to sleep next to her. Once again, I was looking at the end goal of cutting her out of my life rather than the short-term pain of sleeping next to her. I hoped that my Anne tattoo on my chest would prevent any contact with me. I would leave Friday night for Clear Creek and return home Monday morning, which eliminated 3 of the 7 nights with her. The remaining 4 nights I had to endure. I turned her down, saying, "Not yet, let's take it one step at a time. Let time help us heal from this," I lied. One morning I needed to deliver a part to an airplane undergoing maintenance on the airfield, and I saw IT. It was Lance's asshole airplane. I walked over and talked to some guys I knew in that hangar. They confirmed that it was his airplane and he was in it. I decided to call the plane late that night and see what I could do to make his life, or what was left of it, miserable. I knew I couldn't handle him as man-to-man or even as a man with a heavy wrench with a man. He was a big, strong man. Thoughts of shooting him or disrupting an airplane landing crossed my mind, but I would miss my boys sitting in jail. Still unable to come up with a plan, I returned to the hangar at 9 p.m. to see if there were any weaknesses I could exploit. I was surprised to see a light in the cabin, but the door was bolted shut. I found a rolling ladder and squeezed in close enough to see what was going on in the cabin. There he was, sitting at his computer. Now I had a plan. I videotaped what I saw and went straight to the police station. They were fully armed and called a judge to get a search warrant that same evening. I went with them on the raid to show them where his plane was and how to get close to it without him noticing them. When the police were on the scene, I backed off as I didn't want him to know I was involved. The police pounced on him from all sides. 2 police officers on a rolling ladder videotaped his computer before ripping the cabin door off. He resisted, but a couple stun blows with a stun gun and he went quiet. They confiscated the computer and took him to jail. It was all over the news and I know Shelley saw it but never commented. She asked me about being near his airplane that night when I was working late. I shrugged and she said, "I hope Lance rots in hell." Me too. Since he had his own airplane and plenty of money to flee the country, he couldn't go free. It's not easy for perverts like him to make friends in prison. Influenced by Shelley's whore friends as well as my rejection, it wasn't long before she was caught cheating again. Not a soccer hero, not a TV star, just a horny bartender who got her drunk on alcohol. He was joined by a few guys and somehow the video got on the net. She had to go back to the clinic to get rid of her STDs again. My attorney had assessed her correctly. She was going to cheat again and now I had her on my radar. After I showed Shelley the video, she collapsed in her chair. I didn't need to say anything, I told her. "Call your whore friends and have them come and get your shit out of my house." The next day, 3 women showed up to help Shelley move the stuff out. I didn't want to miss this outcome. Plus, I didn't trust them not to take and destroy my stuff. I was the center of their smug anger. The bleach blonde growled, "You'd have to be the biggest jerk in the world to push a woman who loves you out into the street." Laughing, I said, "She got the opportunity to entertain someone else however she wanted, but she promised not to." She knew the rules and she screwed up her marriage. Now she has to deal with the consequences. At the airport, you told me, get over it. That's how I'm going to get over it. By kicking her ass out of my life and out of my marriage. A disgruntled expression appeared on her face because she knew I was right. We were to meet at my attorney's office to sign the divorce, gift, and custody papers. Shelley had brought her attorney with her to contest everything we had already signed. He ranted, huffed, puffed, and exclaimed, "This postnuptial agreement is an outrage. It's just a humiliating tirade by a bitter, vindictive man. It's worthless." My lawyer looked at me and then said, "You are right. This agreement is demeaning to both sides. It is disgusting and offensive. But as disgusting as it is, it's still legal. That's what you and I do every day. Take something shameful and disgusting and make it legal. So let's get it over with." I left the meeting and Shelley sobbed and wailed in the conference room. My house, my children, my marriage. Please don't take all of this away from me. I won't have anything left. Please, I'm begging you. Please. That's probably the last I'll hear from her. I hope so. Carter and Tyler started talking to me about moving permanently to Clear Creek. I wasn't opposed to it, but I needed to talk to Pat and Bill first. Shelley disappeared from my life and I took the boys to Clear Creek on Friday night. I told Pat and Bill the whole story and the fact that we were now divorced. They were very disappointed in Shelley, but were glad that their 3 boys were not badly hurt. That's right, we were now their 3 boys. As we drove through the pastures, Bill and I discussed that we would move to a cabin and I would become a Clear Creek employee. Bill smiled his wise smile and said, "Interesting that you bring that up. Pat and I have discussed it before and have been meaning to talk to you about it. We'd be glad to have you 3 guys stay at the ranch." We shook hands and continued our conversation. The next afternoon, I was particularly dirty after working at the store, and Pat came out to check on me. I was holding my shirt under the water faucet to clean it and make it cooler when she walked into the store. She stopped for a moment, stared at me, and silently started walking toward me. Stopping about a meter away from me, she placed her hand on my tattoo. The one tattoo that proclaimed that her daughter was my one and only love. She hugged me, sweaty, smelling of perfume. She said softly, "She was so lucky to have a man who loved her so much." Yes, I did love her and I miss her very much. She turned and walked back into the house, holding a tissue to her eyes. When the boys were out of school, we sold the house in Wichita and moved into the bunker. Both boys had their own rooms and the third room became a TV family room. We didn't need a kitchen since Pat did the cooking. Shelley kept in touch with the boys via email and phone calls. I had absolutely no contact with her. Carter was old enough to drive with a limited license to run farm errands. It was amazing how many places he could find to run farm errands. Both boys enjoyed interacting with the neighborhood kids. Amber Reynolds' name seemed to come up in conversations about where Carter went and who he was with. I asked him, "Do you know her parents?" He replied, "Yeah, she's one of my teachers, and her dad was a veterinarian but died 2 years ago. And her mom is awesome." It was an encyclopedia of information gleaned from Carter. Toward the end of the summer, the neighborhood ranchers had their annual barbecue. I knew most of the ranchers now, so I felt at home at the party. Standing by the beer tank, I saw a woman looking the other way, whom I mistook for Anne. It couldn't have been her, but she looked just like her. I started to move towards her and she turned, saw me, and smiled. I smiled back and realized she was of Hispanic descent and definitely not an Anne clone. Someone touched her arm and she turned to speak to him. I walked away, glad I hadn't embarrassed myself. A short time later, Carter and Amber asked me to stop by their house and meet her mother, Emily. I readily agreed. It turned out that the Hispanic woman was Amber's mother. Up close, she was a very pretty woman with facial features similar to Anne's. We found common ground and continued to communicate after the children left us. We even danced together a few times. As we were leaving the concrete dance floor, I saw Pat walking toward us. She was walking under the arm of another woman, and they both had big smiles on their faces. I said to Emily, "I wonder what Pat has on her mind right now." Emily replied, "How do you know Pat?" "She is my mother-in-law, and I live in their cabin with my boys." "Then you must be he!" she almost shouted. "What's he like?" I stuttered. "The one who married Anne. I was Cousin Anne's maid of honor at your wedding. The woman with Aunt Pat is my mother, Mary Hernandez. Mary and Pat are sisters. My goodness, so that's why your son's name is Carter, isn't it? She called out to her mother. Mom! Mom! It's him, Mom, Anne's husband. I finally found him. Emily turned to me and said, Let me look at him. See what? I asked. The tattoo of love for Anne. Please let me see it. I undid the buttons on my shirt. Then she put her hand on the tattoo and an electric charge ran through both of us. A very strong connection developed between us. We both looked into each other's eyes and realized we were connected. Pat said, I see you have finally found each other. We were hoping you'd do it on your own so you wouldn't think we set it up. Out of nowhere, I realized we were holding hands. Pat grabbed me by my unbuttoned shirt and turned to Emily and said, You and Anne were just alike. You can't help but try to undress that man. We all howled with laughter at her comment. I wasn't trying to create a new Anne, and she wasn't looking for a clone of her late husband. We truly began to care for and love each other for who we were, not what we lacked in our late spouse. The following July, Emily and I rode our horses to a special place to observe the Perseid meteor shower. It was a place she was very familiar with. As we sat on the blanket, cuddling together, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box. Emily, my love for you is so deep in my soul that I need to be with you every day. Marry me, please. Oh, Bobby, I really want to marry you. You are the best man for me in the whole universe. We kissed and lay on our backs to hold each other, knowing that where we went next would be special to us. Suddenly, she called out, Look! It was again, the first time I had seen it since I proposed to Anne. 2 stars in a cloud smiling broadly. Epilogue. Bobby and Emily got married that fall, and Bobby moved into Emily's house. For the first time in almost 20 years, no one lived in the cabin. That was until Cater earned a university degree in animal science and production management and moved into the bunkhouse. He enjoyed the privacy, especially when Amber came to visit. A year later, Carter and Amber reunited the Smith and Carter families. When they had children, they moved into Pat and Bill's home when they moved into the town's senior living community. Bill still drives to Clear Creek every day to watch over and reminisce. Tyler comes to the ranch for wheat harvesting, pheasant hunting, and the holidays. He has a girlfriend with whom he lives in Kansas City, where they both have jobs. Bill and Pat have provided funds for their 2 grandsons to pursue higher education. Both boys will visit their mother for holidays and birthdays. She married a man who retired from the U.S. Post Office. The boys believe she is happy now. Lance Belton pleaded guilty in lieu of trial because he did not want the investigation into his criminal activities to continue. He was sentenced to 12 years in a place he didn't like. Pat and Bill transferred their interests in Clear Creek Ranch, Inc. Bobby, Carter, and Tyler, 33.3% each. Clear Creek pays Bill a consultant's fee to meet all of their nursing home needs. Bobby and Emily are completely in love with each other and the way their lives have turned out. They have both been through pain and grief, but they have found a way to push it aside. Bobby's tattoo didn't discourage Emily, even though he had her cousin's name on his chest. She happily tells her friends that she's tried to ignore it 1,000 times over the years with Bobby, but it doesn't embarrass her one bit. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.